Have you ever stopped to think that rice, that simple and harmless food present on the plates of billions of people every day, could be capable of sinking gigantic ships weighing several tons? It seems completely absurd, right? How could such a small, common grain, which we cook without a second thought, represent a deadly threat to enormous vessels made of reinforced steel, designed by brilliant engineers to withstand the most violent ocean storms? Well, the reality is much stranger and more frightening than you imagined. And what I'm about to reveal will completely change the way you look at this seemingly innocent grain. The story you are about to discover involves real tragedies, surprising physics, and a phenomenon so dangerous that it is responsible for strict maritime regulations worldwide. Get ready, because this journey will shake everything you thought you knew about maritime transport and naval safety. Let's start from the beginning. When we talk about ships that transport bulk cargo, we're talking about true monsters of the seas. These are colossal vessels that can carry tens of thousands of tons of goods in their immense hulls, which occupy almost the entire length of the hull. These ships carry everything from iron ore and coal to grains like wheat, corn, soybeans, and, of course, rice. Rice is one of the most transported agricultural products in the world, precisely because it is a staple food on virtually every continent. Millions of tons are shipped annually, from Asia to America, from America to Africa, creating essential trade routes for the global economy. But here's the problem that nobody tells you when you buy your little package at the supermarket. Rice has unique physical properties that make it extremely dangerous when transported in large quantities inside a constantly moving ship. And I'm not exaggerating at all. There have been real shipwrecks with loss of human lives where rice was identified as the main culprit for the disaster. Now, you might be wondering, but how is this possible? The secret lies in a phenomenon called cargo liquefaction. This is a technical term that sounds complicated, but I'll explain it in a way that will make you perfectly understand the deadly danger we're talking about. When you look at dry rice in a warehouse or in the hold of a ship, it looks solid, doesn't it? They are separate, firm grains that you can pick up with your hands without any problem. But the truth is that when rice is stored in large quantities, especially if it hasn't been completely dried before shipment, it contains a significant amount of moisture between the grains. This moisture may not be visible to the naked eye, but it's there, hidden in the microscopic spaces between millions and millions of stacked grains. And it is this invisible moisture that turns everything into a nightmare when the ship begins to sail on the open sea. I'll tell you exactly what happens inside that dark hold while the ship rocks on the ocean waves. Imagine billions of grains of rice stacked meters high, pressed against each other by the weight of the cargo itself. When the ship rocks to one side due to the movement of the waves, that entire gigantic mass of rice tries to move too, right? But here's the crucial point that transforms safety into catastrophe. The constant movement and vibration of the ship cause the grains of rice to begin to reorganize themselves, compacting in different ways. And when this happens, the water that was trapped between the grains begins to be released. Slowly, gradually, that moisture accumulates, forming small pockets of liquid in the middle of the rice mass. And when there is enough free water between the grains, something absolutely terrifying happens. The entire cargo completely loses its solid characteristic and transforms into a kind of dense, heavy liquid, like quicksand flowing inside the ship. When liquefaction occurs, the rice is no longer a stable and predictable cargo. Becomes a viscous fluid that can slide freely from one side of the hold to the other whenever the ship rocks. And here comes the most terrifying part of this whole story. When tons and tons of liquefied rice move all at once to the same side of the ship, they create what we call a list or lateral inclination. Imagine a huge cargo ship weighing thousands of tons, sailing normally on the high seas. Suddenly, the cargo in the hold shifts all to the right. The ship violently tilts to the right, as if being pushed by a gigantic invisible force. The engineers designed the ship to handle the movement of the waves, but they didn't expect the cargo itself to turn into an unstable liquid. The inclination increases a little more, and when it exceeds a critical angle that we call the angle of stability, there's no turning back. The ship simply capsizes, flipping over like a toy in a bathtub, and within minutes it is completely submerged, taking the entire crew and cargo with it to the bottom of the ocean. Do you think I'm making up stories to scare you? Then let me tell you about real cases that happened and completely changed international regulations on grain transport. One of the most famous and tragic cases was the sinking of the MS Acanthus in 2009. It was a cargo ship carrying rice from Thailand to Kenya, a common and seemingly safe route. The vessel left port normally, with all the documentation in order, an experienced crew, and reasonable weather conditions. But, few days after leaving the coast, the ship simply disappeared from radar. When search teams finally found the wreckage on the seabed, the investigation revealed that the most likely cause of the sinking was precisely the liquefaction of the rice cargo. The moisture in the rice, combined with the movement of the sea, transformed the cargo into a deadly liquid that completely destabilized the vessel. All the crew members died. Entire families were left without fathers, without children, without husbands, all because of a phenomenon that could have been avoided with the correct procedures for drying and storing the rice before shipment. And this wasn't an isolated case. My friend, over the last few decades, maritime investigators have identified dozens of shipwrecks where cargo liquefaction was pointed to as the main cause or a significant contributor to the disaster. The problem is so serious that the International Maritime Organization, which is like the UN of the oceans, created specific regulations called the IMSBC Code, which is the International Solid Bulk Cargo Code. This code establishes strict moisture limits for different types of grains and materials that can liquefy. For rice specifically, there is a maximum percentage of moisture allowed before shipment. If the rice exceeds this limit, it simply cannot be loaded onto the ship until it is properly dried. But here's another problem. In many ports around the world, especially in developing countries where enforcement is weaker, these rules are not followed with the necessary rigor. There is economic pressure to load cargo quickly, to avoid losing contracts, to avoid delaying deliveries. And so, rice with moisture above the permitted level ends up being loaded anyway, turning that ship into a floating time bomb. The physics behind liquefaction is fascinating when you stop to analyze it. What happens is that rice grains, when dry, are in direct contact with each other, creating a structure that engineers call a granular network. It's as if each grain is holding its neighbor, creating a solid and stable mass. But when there is water between the grains, this network is destroyed because the water acts as a lubricant. The grains lose direct contact with each other and begin to slide over one another without resistance. It's exactly the same principle as quicksand that you see in movies. Dry sand is firm. You can walk on it without a problem. But when the sand is saturated with water and you step on it, the sand grains separate and you sink because you have completely lost solid support. In the case of the ship, it's not you who sinks in the cargo. It's the entire cargo that turns into fluid and unbalances the whole vessel. And the scariest thing is that this process can happen suddenly. Rice may appear stable during days of travel, and then, with a single, stronger rocking caused by a larger wave, the liquefaction process is irreversibly activated. Captains and navigation officers are trained to identify signs that cargo is behaving abnormally. One of the first indicators is that the ship begins to experience what is called an altered rolling period. This means that when the ship rolls to one side and then back up, this movement is slower or faster than it should be. It's as if the ship is hesitating before returning to an upright position. This happens because the liquefied cargo is moving internally, altering the center of gravity unpredictably. Another sign is hearing strange noises coming from the holds, such as a sound of something flowing or shifting in mass. When these signs appear, safety protocol dictates that the captain immediately change course to the nearest port, reduce speed to minimize rolling, and send emergency messages to maritime authorities. But unfortunately, in many cases, when the signs become obvious, it is already too late. Liquefaction has progressed so far that any movement of the sea can be the final push that causes capsizing. There's an important technical detail that most people don't know, and it makes everything even more dangerous. Not all ship holds are the same. Some ships have internal partitions that separate the cargo into smaller compartments. These partitions are designed precisely to prevent all the cargo from moving at once from one side to the other. If you have 10,000 tons of rice divided into 5 compartments of 2,000 tons each, and liquefaction occurs in only one compartment, the damage is much less than if all 10,000 tons move together. But building ships with multiple compartments is more expensive, slightly reduces the usable cargo space, and therefore not all shipping companies invest in this type of vessel. It's a matter of economy versus safety, and unfortunately, when the focus is only on maximum profit, safety ends up being sacrificed. And those who pay the price are the sailors who risk their lives every day transporting goods around the world. But rice isn't the only grain with this deadly problem, although it's one of the worst culprits. Other grains like soybeans, corn, and even some types of fine minerals can liquefy under the right conditions. What makes rice particularly dangerous is its ability to absorb and retain moisture very efficiently. Rice is hygroscopic, a scientific term meaning it literally pulls water from the environment. So even if the rice has been properly dried before being bagged or shipped in bulk, if it is stored in a humid environment before shipment, or if the ship's hold has condensation due to temperature differences between the inside and outside air, the rice will gradually absorb that moisture during the voyage, and the longer the voyage, the greater the risk. A short 3 or 4 day trip might be relatively safe, even with slightly damp rice. But an ocean crossing of 2 or 3 weeks, passing through different climate zones with changes in temperature and air humidity, is a recipe for disaster if the correct procedures aren't followed. The maritime industry learned these lessons the hard way, with lives lost and ships sinking. That's why today there's specific technology to monitor cargo conditions throughout the voyage. Modern sensors can be installed inside the hulls to continuously measure humidity, temperature, and even detect abnormal cargo movements. This data is transmitted in real time to the ship's bridge and also to land-based shipping companies. If any parameter falls outside the safe range, alarms are triggered immediately, and preventative measures can be taken before the situation becomes critical. But again, this technology costs money, requires maintenance, and not all ships are equipped with these advanced systems. In many parts of the world, especially on less regulated trade routes, older ships continue to operate with minimal equipment, relying only on crew experience and luck to avoid tragedies. There's also the issue of marine insurance, which complicates everything. When a ship sinks carrying rice or any other dangerous cargo, a complex investigation begins to determine the exact cause of the sinking. Insurance companies want to know if it was negligence on the part of the ship owner who loaded the ship with rice that was too wet, if it was the captain's failure to detect danger signs, if it was an unforeseen event like an exceptional storm, or if it was a structural problem with the ship itself. This investigation can take years and involves divers going to the wreckage, analysis of black boxers when they exist, interviews with survivors, if there are any, and a whole chain of experts trying to reconstruct exactly what happened in the final moments before the ship capsized. And depending on the conclusion, millions or even billions of dollars in compensation may be at stake. That's why there's a huge incentive for each party involved to try to shift the blame to the other side. The rice exporter says the cargo was dry when it left the warehouse. The ship owner says the captain should have noticed the problem sooner. The captain, if he survived, says the instruments showed nothing abnormal, and in the end, families of dead sailors are left waiting for justice that is slow in coming or never arrives. The most ironic thing about this whole story is that rice, the grain that causes so many problems for ships, was one of the first commodities transported by sea in human history. Thousands of years ago, Asian merchants were already carrying rice from one port to another in small wooden boats. At that time, shipments were small. The sacks were made of fabric that allowed the rice to breathe, and the voyages were short because the ships sailed close to the coast. So the problem of liquefaction practically didn't exist. It was only with the development of gigantic modern cargo ships, capable of carrying tens of thousands of tons at once and making ocean voyages that last weeks, that this phenomenon began to become a real threat. It's a perfect example of how technological progress can create new problems we never imagined existed. We built larger ships to be more efficient and profitable, but we unintentionally created the perfect conditions for the cargo to become a weapon against the ship itself. So the next time you grab that plate of rice at lunch, remember this whole story. Remember that those harmless little white grains have a dark and dangerous side that very few people know about. Remember that. There's a complex science behind the safe transport of this common food. And remember that there are brave sailors who spend months away from home, facing the dangers of the ocean, often without even knowing that the cargo they are transporting could become the cause of their own death. Now, you know a secret that even many people who work in maritime transport are unaware of the darkest details. Share this information, because knowledge saves lives. The more people know about the risks of cargo liquefaction, the more pressure there is for regulations to be strictly followed, for safety technology to be implemented on all ships, and for preventable tragedies to stop happening in our oceans. And if you were shocked by this revelation about rice and the hidden dangers of maritime transport, I'm sure you'll want to discover other fascinating and frightening secrets that the world hides right under our noses. So don't go away now. Click on that video that's appearing on your screen right now and continue this journey of discovery that will make you see the world with completely different eyes. Each tidbit reveals a piece of reality you never imagined existed.